Welcome to the Consulting Lifestyle Podcast. I am your host, Diogène Tirandekura. On this show, you will discover the realities, the successes and the struggles of business management and information technology consultants in the fast-moving B2B world. So stay tuned if you want to know more about what it takes to have a consulting lifestyle. Hello, my guest today is Peter Bjellerup. Peter is an independent consultant based in Sweden. He is an ex-employee of IBM, where he spent a lot of years in his career, and he has a wide international consulting and industry experience. Peter has created Brightsider in early 2019. Brightsider is not only his company, it is also a blog, Swedish-speaking blog, and on which Peter writes a lot of articles. Peter also runs an English-speaking blog called thesocialswede.com. In this conversation, you will get to know Peter's vision about what being a consultant is, what does good consulting mean, and the importance of listening, and also other very actionable tips. So stay tuned and enjoy the interview with Peter Bjellerup. So hello, Peter. How are you?
Hello, Diogène. Very nice to talk to you again. It's been a couple of years.
A couple of years. Actually about 12 years. We haven't seen face to face.
Not face to face, but that doesn't matter that much these days.
Yeah,
there
exactly.
Many other ways of keeping in touch.
Yeah, exactly. We did keep in touch, I think, through Facebook and LinkedIn mainly. So
primarily, yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. That's great. Thank you for coming to the Consulting Lifestyle Podcast. I think there are a lot of things that are your experience can bring a lot of value to the audience, and there are a lot of subjects that we can attack today. First, I think for the audience, what would be good is for them to have some introduction about yourself.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Diogène, and thank you for inviting me to the podcast. It will be very interesting. About myself, simply since a couple of months, I have started my own business, Brightsider, in Sweden, where I live and where I worked a lot of time. But before then, and where we met once upon a time, was when I was at IBM, mostly in the consulting arm of IBM.
And it was IBM Sweden, right?
IBM, employed by IBM Sweden, but been traveling all over the world. Join consulting, see the world, as they say, which isn't necessarily true. But if you want to and find the right spot, you can.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and before then, I've been in marketing and communications in the graphic industry, and started off once upon a time trying to sell packaging machines in West Africa, in the Middle East, and New Zealand. So I started off as an expat, straight after business school once upon a time. I have lots of stories to tell about those days, but that's not what this podcast is for.
No, but not directly maybe, but some of those experiences may have helped you into your career later. Having lived
socially, definitely yes, and because you always have something interesting to tell, at least the first time you meet somebody. But then also, sort of maybe a bit of an attitude of not getting overly worried about practical things, but always prepare as much as you can. Maybe I think I brought that lesson with me from those days.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and of course, being able to handle people of different cultures, because that is one thing that I've really learned from both working abroad and living abroad, and that is wherever you go, people are the same and totally different at the same time. Yeah, and. That's really what I like about traveling a lot. You learn new things all the time, which is part of my lifestyle. Learning, always learning.
Yes. So after those experiences in Middle East, Africa, and New Zealand, you did work for another organization in Sweden, and then you went into consulting.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I ended up doing a 7-year stint in the printing industry,
Mm-hmm.
which is not very relevant here, but once again, solving problems and selling, because it's one of those things. Some people look down at people who say that they're into sales, and of course, selling used cars isn't really my thing. But I mean, in essence, also a consultant. Even though you might have somebody else who has sold your services and your job is to deliver,
Yeah.
you still sell your conclusions. You still sell your ideas and your thoughts and your competence.
Yes.
So even though we're not selling in a trade for money, we still are in the mode of convincing and trying to make people understand, which in my book is a lot of what selling is about. Because for me, selling is really helping people to buy. Yeah. And then we're into the consultant mindset, at least my way.
Great, and I think that's what your last sentence is a great segue to what we want to talk about with regards to consulting in itself. And what is your vision? What do you think about what good consulting is? When you, I will not say it versus sales, but what do you think good consulting is? Because I think it is related a bit to what you say when you said, okay, we are helping people to buy. What does a consultant help people or organizations to do?
Well, I mean, first of all, just I'm not sure. I mean, since English is my second language and I live in Sweden, just as a caveat, I would like to say, because in Sweden, when speaking Swedish, people use the expression consultant also for somebody who is just temping. And in my book, that is not consulting.
Yeah. Temping being a temporary worker, that's what you mean.
Temporary worker, yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
An extra pair of hands.
Yeah.
To me, a consultant is rather instead of an extra pair of hands, you're an extra brain with the experience, with the skills, and all those things. So that is the type of consulting I'm talking about. What you bring with your head, which I think is an important distinction. And in that context, I would, because in that context, you often get into problem solving. And many people think that consultants should solve problems for clients.
Yes.
And I say, no, that's not what good consulting is. Or maybe it's decent consulting, but really good or great consulting is not solving the problems for clients. It is helping clients solve their problems.
Which is very different.
Which is very different, which sometimes may actually end up with the client not understanding that what your contribution was. But I'll explain why I think it is important.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, actually, going back to when I started business, I haven't told you this before, but I actually turned down McKinsey and started working at Tetra Pak instead.
Oh, wow. We are talking about which year, approximately?
1984.
Wow. Okay.
And the reason was that I wanted to be able to have some real work experience as I saw it. I didn't want to have to just be a supplier of slides. It wasn't even PowerPoint. These were physical slides showing a solution of some kind. I wanted to be able to answer the question properly. What did you do when you encountered something like this? Well, I actually have not been out in the line. I've only been consulting.
Yes.
So I wanted to have some practical experience first. And I might have lost a friend in the process of turning down McKinsey because he recommended me, but that's another story.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you say, because we can start consulting from school, but also from coming from the industry.
Yeah,
and that's good. You put yourself in a situation in which you had to make decisions for the business before becoming the advisor. Yeah.
That was at least the way my mindset and the way I was thinking in those days. But the point where I was getting to was that the kind of consulting that I'm looking for is people ask for expertise consultants to come in when they have a problem, and the purpose of the whole thing is not to present a solution to the problem. The purpose is to get the problem solved. So it's not enough to present a solution, it has to be implemented.
Yes.
And the chances of it being implemented are so much greater if the client takes ownership of it. If they think of it as their solution, their idea, and not the thing that these bright young consultants in shiny suits and ties, that they gave us this solution, and now we can choose to implement it or not. Then the chances are that it never will be. So that is why I say that great consulting is helping clients solve their problems themselves, more like a coach.
Yeah, that's great. So you have a mindset of accompanying the client to the resolution of the problem. So accompanying the client to the solution,
yes,
instead of just saying, I have done XYZ activity, my work is done.
Exactly.
Regardless of where the client is at the end. Yeah.
Exactly, because the reason they pay big money, hopefully, is to get a problem solved, to actually get some change implemented or whatever it is. So therefore, it doesn't stop with presenting a solution for them. It has to be accepted, taken on board, and implemented.
Yes.
So and the chances increase with them taking ownership from the start, being involved in resolution.
And now, if we thanks for that, and if we want to know a bit more about what happens during your work as a consultant, so I'm not asking you to summarize all your long career in a few minutes, but if we could go with one practical example and maybe one lesson that you had when you talk about what does a consultant have to do when he or she is on a specific client assignment. So what is the I don't want to say mindset, but what is the perspective that consultant must have when they are working in B2B assignments?
Well, of course, you could be. I'm not the kind of number crunching financials or that kind or logistics consultant. I've been working more with people, and in that context, it is the same. It's really the same as all good communications. You always have to work from the perspective of the people you're trying to help, or you're trying to communicate with. So the first thing is that I think is really important is to easily to possess empathy, to easily be able to put yourself in their shoes, and I'll get back to that. But also to see. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to identifying drivers.
Okay.
Not saying, not looking at something is like this or is like that, but looking at why is it like this? Why is it like that? Because if you understand the why, then you can find what to change.
Yeah. Do you have one example of driver or maybe just one example that will help people to understand what do you mean by what is behind the figure, behind the hard.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have a story there, but it's actually not from consulting. But I think it explains it anyway.
But it can explain.
Yeah, I was before I joined IBM. I was for a while in an ad agency working internationally, and in the leadership team, everybody was a native English speaker except me.
Okay.
Even though it was in Sweden, so it was expats, all of them. Mm-hmm. And I came to the first meeting of the leadership team, and I just sat there listening to the others speaking for a while. Okay. I mean, I was the new kid on the block, so I was just listening. And while I was listening, I was thinking of, I hear what they say, and I try to analyze what's behind. What is it that they're trying to achieve? What drives them to say this thing? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I did the analysis on the fly during the meeting. And then finally I opened my mouth. I asked a couple of questions, which of course were aimed at these things. And it ended up with all decisions going the way I wanted them to. Because I had identified their drivers. I had identified their sort of hidden agenda. It sounds like it was some kind of battle, but I had identified those things. So by just asking the right questions, everything worked out the way I wanted it to, even though I was the rookie.
Great. Yeah. So you asked the questions to the people of that the people within that ad agency. You ask the questions, deep questions that enable you to understand what deeply drives them, what deeply motivates them.
No, rather, I think that I had, from what they had said, I had already understood what drove them, but I asked the questions that made them rethink. Rather.
Okay. Re-put in question what they put. Okay. Good.
and that is also, I mean, one of the typical things which we are guilty of too often, that we don't listen. We hear what people say, but we are completely busy in our head with thinking of the follow-up question, or how should I sort of ask something to make them go my way, instead of doing active listening. Instead of just hearing. But I actually think that you should go one step further, and that is what I call empathic listening.
Empathic listening.
Yes. That's great. Which is one step further, and really try not only to listen to what they say, but also try to understand why they say it.
Okay. Yeah. So
where do they come from? What is their context? What is their history? And trying to put all those things, so you don't only listen to what they say carefully, but also get an understanding of why they say it.
Why they say it. Yeah. Empathic listening over active listening. I think
that's sort of the next step. That's empathic listening would I mean, you could say active listening 2.0. Maybe. I don't know.
No, but empathic listening is very I think it's a very self-explanatory saying. I think is good. And with that, so with empathic listening, your work with for many years at IBM. At the start of the conversation, you were saying that you created a Brightsider a few, if I'm not wrong, this year. So some months ago. So it's very recent. So what led you to create Brightsider? And actually, what do you do with it? Maybe for the audience, we can know that a little bit more.
Well, what led me to create it was that finally, let's say, after 15 years, IBM and I were done with each other mutually.
15 years, yeah, that's a
15 years. Yeah, I joined the company as actually I joined the company through an acquisition, and at that time, I was about to start my own business because I had concluded that I was, at that time, I was sort of in the mid of my expected work life. And I had taken the a look and said, okay, do I want to continue with what I do until I retire? And I concluded that yes, either I continue with what I do for myself, and if I work for somebody else, I want some development. And I didn't see it at the time where I was. And then one day they said, IBM is about to buy us. And I said, okay, 330,000 new colleagues, which it was at the time. There's probably potential for some development there. I'll hang on for a while. And I ended up hanging on for 15 years. And that is, I mean, as you know yourself, from in such a big organization, you may have the same employer, but you do different jobs. So I think over those 15 years, I've had 5 or 6 different job roles or something like that, plus a lot of different assignments. So, I mean, it's not that I've done the same thing for 15 years, of course.
Yes.
But we were done. And so I ended up thinking of this, what I should do on my own. And I had been thinking of it for a while. So I ended up creating this little company, working primarily with employee engagement, but taking it from all the way through from talking to actually into the workshop. So you start off with leadership development. So you develop leaders who actually provide a basis for cultivation of the inherent engagement of employees, at least if you've employed the right people.
Okay.
Secondly, performance management with a motivating touch. So performance management in a way that you actually continue to cultivate, because it's easy that it just ends up with talking. But, you know, I mean, you get what you measure. So if you want people to be engaged, to take initiatives, to help each other, you can't just measure sales, for example, or measure the hours that you have delivered to a client. You have to work with different measurements. And that's the next step. And the last step, then I come into my background from IBM of what I call effective tools. I mean, you can have engaged people with motivational goals, and then you give them the IT equivalent of a rusty shovel. Well, they won't really feel appreciated. So rusty shovel in my language translates to standardized IT solutions out of the box, the same for everybody. Not so it's people talk about digital workplace, but I would rather talk about the personal workplace. And that is the last step. And then, of course, a bit of consulting things like facilitating workshops and doing trainings and things like that on custom made.
So it's great. So Brightsider is very organizational focus, if I want to say it. So with at the employee engagement, performance management with non-conventional metrics, if I can if I can say it like that, and then your last point, which was about using effective tools. So it's not necessarily because the more technical you go doesn't mean that the best it is. It's just the most appropriate tool that matters.
The most appropriate tool, and then you get a bit of user experience in this, usability, that you actually make them work in the context of employees.
Great. And how do you do you keep with your work today? Do you keep your with Brightsider today? Do you keep the same mindset as when you were working for IBM, or do you use do you have another perspective now when you go at clients, when you perform?
Well, I use the same mindset I have used for many years because in my mind, I haven't worked for IBM. I have worked for
That's right.
myself. I have worked for the clients. So it's just that now I
Great.
can work with my mindset without being harnessed by a big organization and their policies and their measurements and metrics. So it's really it's a bit like breaking free and being me or through and through, because I think that, especially for a consultant, I think that you should think of your employer as a distribution channel for you.
Okay, what? Maybe just elaborate a little
Yeah,
bit.
I'll explain that. First of all, we all know that good relations are reasonably balanced. I mean, and then it can be a romantic relationship, but also an employment relationship.
Employer-employee, yeah.
Yeah, if there is, if it's very imbalanced, it doesn't work out in the long run.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think with the mindset of thinking of your employer as a distribution channel for yourself, you automatically get a more balanced relationship. Because if you think of compared with a supermarket, the consultant, I am the goods that should be on the shelf of the supermarket.
Yes.
Yeah. It should be on the right shelf. The people should put the right price on them and give it the right position and exposure for what it is, and all those things. But it actually is just the first step. The next step is reaching the consumer, or as in consulting, the client.
The client, yeah.
So therefore, I have, when I was at IBM, I was always thinking of the client, and then how do I get to the client, which was this. So I've been, and the fun thing is that it ended up with me probably being for a very long time an ideal employee, because I did everything the company wanted. Yeah. I kept developing. I kept working on my eminence, as it was called in IBM. I mean, my reputation and skills, and all those things. And I also kept I did the best work I could possibly do. But in my mind, I did it for myself and the clients. And IBM was just sort of a middleman in this. And it isn't because it was IBM. It would be the same for any other company. But that kind of mindset it also has given me a feel of, you could say, job security. Yeah. Because your distribution channel, you should always look at it and reevaluate it if it's the right distribution channel. Yeah. And I used to say that what you've really made it as a consultant when people ask for you by name, not somebody with your skills.
Yeah, that is so important because in our industry, it's a lot about word of mouth and reputation and being somebody that people like to work with. Yep. And when you become someone that people like to work with or like to get the problem solved by, then yes, you have really reached a big stage when you get there.
Yeah. If I get back to the expression eminence I mentioned before, yes. I know it's not the. I mean, at least in British English, it's also sort of, that's what you call a bishop. But in IBM for a while, they used it in a different way, and it all boiled down to, in my very simple explanation, because I ended up explaining it to lots of new consultants. It is really about being known for being really good at something in demand.
And that is so important. If you get those three things, so being known to be really good at something in demand.
Exactly. I mean, if you're really good at something in demand, but nobody knows about it, you won't get on that shelf I mentioned before.
Exactly.
if you get known for being for something, but you really can't deliver, well, you might get off the shelf on the shelf once, but you get off the shelf pretty quickly. Yeah. And then being really good and being known for it, but it's actually something that nobody wants to pay for, or the company isn't really interested in selling, which is a bit where I am now with what I do in Brightsider. Well, if there's no demand, or if it's sort of out of the strategic scope of your employer, well, you can be as known as you want to for something that you're really good at, but they won't sell it anyway.
Yes, you will not be.
So you need all three to be strong and in balance.
Yes, and that's a very good lesson. Very often we can get excited by shiny objects, or we can have a misconception about what is really in demand, or we can also have a misconception about how good we really are. Because that might be dependent on performance appraisals that we have had, but maybe the perspective of the person that provided you the performance appraisal was not really about the performance itself. Maybe it helped advance another agenda, or it's a favor or whatever. And yes,
very possible.
It's so difficult, and consulting is not like I don't know, sports where you have a ranking.
No.
Ranking. Okay, you won, you lose, so people know when you're better than before. So it's very qualitative.
Yeah, exactly. So, I fully agree. But this also means that as a consultant, you really need to do some personal branding and marketing.
Yeah.
Both internally, if there is a way to do so, to get on the shelf, to make sure that your colleagues and the people who sell the consulting services know that you're there and what you're good at, but also on the outside of the company, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and other social media, and really show off and be good at what you do. And when I say show off, it's very simple. I mean, bragging isn't what does it. It is helping and adding value. And that comes back to what I think consulting is all about, adding value.
Yes. And that's what you do as well since quite some years. You do produce written blog posts on different medium. Maybe for the audience, you can tell which ones you're working, you're writing on, and if it's in English and Swedish.
Well, if somebody by chance who listens to this can understand Swedish, you're very welcome to visit brightsider.se, where there is a blog in Swedish. I think I will add an English one, but since it's all new, I have a focus on a local version. Then I have my old, I call it splog, sporadic blog, which is on thesocialswede.com, as if there was only one Swede who had some social capabilities. I think that's not true, but thesocialswede.com.
Oh, great.
And I think I will revive it a bit because it's been idle for a while.
No, excellent. We will put all of that in the show notes so that people who wants to find you can find you back. So at Brightsider, Social Swede, and your social media accounts. Sure. I think it was a really great interview. I think we went through a lot of different aspects of the consulting work. I also like that conclusion about being known for what you're good at and for something that is in demand. But beyond that, so given that we are on the Consulting Lifestyle podcast, I wanted to ask you, for you personally, what is your vision about what is a consulting lifestyle? What is it for you?
Yeah, and that is quite simple, actually. I've already mentioned a couple of aspects of it, but to the core, it is really about being at home at the edge of your comfort zone.
Excellent. Can you repeat it?
being at home at the edge of your comfort zone.
Excellent.
Always to challenge yourself, never to sit back. You as a consultant, just as a top manager, actually, your chair doesn't have a backrest. If you lean back, you fall off. Yeah. And you really need always to push your limits, learn new things, and not be afraid of trying something new. You can't be a comfort junkie as a consultant.
Yeah. Yes, you're always pushed into trying new things, and that push as well that make your comfort zone bigger and bigger and bigger.
Exactly.
So that's a great conclusion. So Peter Bjellerup, I think it was a great interview, and thank you very much for all the information. And we see you next time.
Thank you very much, dear Jen, and good luck over there in Montreal.
Thank you. Thanks very much. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Consulting Lifestyle Podcast. Leave a review on iTunes if you enjoyed the episode, and subscribe to the podcast so that you get notified to hear other episodes with your host, Diogène Tirandé-Courant.